Alright, so I personally don't like programming to be boring. So what I'm going to do, instead of just standing up here and talking about loops and if statements and all of that extremely exciting, dry stuff, I'm going to talk about it, but we're going to build an app. Alright? So if you're following along, I'm going to go ahead and close out this app. Let's see, I will just go ahead and remove this project. And I'm going to add a new project to my solution. I'm going to make it a Windows Form app. I'll call it CP Week 2 WinForm. Probably shouldn't do that. WinForm. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to build a web browser. So we're going to actually cover Chapter 5 and a little bit of Chapter 6. And this will be a good primer for what I want you guys to do for an assignment for this week. Alright, so what I'm going to start off by doing is just some basics. And we'll say this is my web browser. So I'll create a form, give it a title. Pull out my toolbox, and let's tuck these out of the way for a little bit. So we have a whole slew of these common controls within the toolbox, as well as containers, menus and toolbars, reporting elements, data elements. What I want to go ahead and do is I want to pull out the toolstrip container and I want to drop it onto my form. So what I'm doing right now is I'm setting up my environment. I'm going to go ahead and from this accelerator pop-up, I'm going to choose the option that says dock fill to form. What that's going to do is it's going to take this little control that's sitting in the middle of my form and it's going to dock it to all four corners, filling the form entirely. So it's now snapped it all the way across. I'm going to remove the panel of visibility from the left and the right. I'm not going to need those. I'll leave my top and bottom. Alright, so that kind of sets me up with a working space. So if we pull up Chrome, comes up what are the basic elements of a web browser. Navigation buttons, forward, back, home, stop, refresh, address bar. Then you actually have the web space itself, the rendering space, and then you have status bars around download progress, things like that. So we want to replicate or emulate that in our own browser. So to do that, I'm going to start by adding a tool strip to my form. And I'm going to drop it up here in this top tool strip container. So what that'll do for me is drop this tool strip item. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add 1, 2, 3, 4 button tools. And for simplicity, I'll add 1 text box tool. Now down here at the bottom, I also have a panel that I can open and close. I'm going to open it, and I'm going to add another tool strip. And on this tool strip, I'm going to add a label and a progress bar. Alright. So you start to see a little bit of that browser structure kind of coming into play. Alright, so I'm going to tuck my toolbar out of the way. I'm going to pull up my properties box and tack it. So I'm just going to start with my buttons, and I'm going to go through and I want to set them up. So I'm going to actually hold down my control key and click on each one of these buttons. And just for simplicity of time, I'm going to change the display style from image to text, so they have words instead of pictures. and then I'm going to choose them one at a time and change their names to be, we'll say nav back, nav forward, nav stop, nav home. Alright. And then I'll change the text property, say home, stop, forward, back. And I'm going to take my text box and where is its size? I'm going to set the width of it equal to, let's do 400 pixels. So it spreads out most of the window. And I'm going to change the name of it to be TXT address box. And then on the lower half, I'm going to click on that tool strip label that I made, and I'm just going to call it LBL status. And then the progress bar, I'll change it to be PB progress. And on that label, I'll also change the text to be blank. Okay, so I'll hit F5, we'll let it compile and run, and ideally we should get a window pop up. It's kind of like a web browser. Come in here, type in our address. Looks good. Should be able to hit enter and load up a page. If we wanted to, we can also come over here on the far end of this, add one more button. Change it to text again. Make it our go button. I'll set my default text in my text box to say http:// Make it easy. Okay. Now obviously what we've done up to this point does not really make it a web browser. We don't have a render space, none of those things. Have all those mechanics of setting up an HTTP header, sending that HTTP header via TCP/IP to port 80 on the requested server. That's assuming that we do the DNS resolution correctly. At that point, we're then going to download the HTML code. Have to parse it, do the layout, lay out the page elements, download the cascading style sheet, parse it, apply the cascading style sheet elements to the HTML, execute any JavaScript that's needed on the page, do the manipulation that's needed for that JavaScript, then actually call the paint commands and paint all the controls and do everything on the form. You ready? Toolbox, common controls, web browser. Done. Okay? So there's actually a web browser control built into the framework that does all of that for you. You point it to a website address, it'll load it up. Okay? Mozilla Firefox, Chrome, Opera, whatever else, Safari, they don't have a control. Well, they might have a control, but they built it. This is essentially using Internet Explorer under the hood. But this control will be the meat of this project. So you don't have to do all of that work of downloading the HTML and doing all those things. If you're interested, I will make this lecture part go very fast, and then I will show you how to do all of those things. So if you're interested, you can stick around for the last hour, and I'll walk through it a little bit. All right, so this is our web browser. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave it as web browser 1. No need to do anything fancy. So at this point, what we now need to do, if we actually run this again, so it comes up blank, is we need to start to attach to some of these events so that we can make different pieces of our form interact with one another. How do we take the address from the address bar and put it into the web browser control? How do we navigate forwards and backwards and do homes and refresh and all these things? How do we update our progress bar at the bottom to make sure that it's rendering the page out correctly, or that it's at least showing progress that the page is being loaded? So the most simplistic one will be our go button. So let's go. And that's kind of the most necessary. So what we're going to do is we need to capture the address from the text box, txt address box. Load the address into the web browser control. Capture the status of the web browser control. Update, mix, bake. So we want to take that text value out of the text box and send it to the browser. So we'll have string address equals txt address box.text. So our local variable address will copy the string value out of the text box. Next step will be web browser 1, our control, our object, our variable. We'll want to call one of these properties or methods in order to actually get the browser control to do what we want. Now there's a lot of ways to go about what's the right option. IntelliSense pop-up comes up and gives us a list of all the properties, methods, and events that are available to us on this object. We can arrow down or scroll through or page down to find what we want. That can be a little cumbersome. If you click on the variable, Visual Studio knows that it's a web browser control. If you press F1 on your keyboard while your cursor is in the variable, Visual Studio will dereference that back to its data type, and then it will, supposed to, kicks you into Visual Studio's MSDN page. Get out of the way. Okay. I guess I do it out of habit. I don't even think about it. Cursor in there, F12. F12 takes you to the variable declaration. Inside of that designer, here's the type, the class. Now you hit F1. It will actually launch to the MSDN page out on the internet that gives you the full definition, similar to a Java doc, for this class. What I like about these, don't like about Java docs, is the fact that it gives you the full rundown of everything about the class. So this class was created by inheriting from these classes. The syntax for the declaration of this class looks like this. Here are the constructors that are available to you for this class. Here's a list of every property that's available to you on this class with an explanation. If you don't feel that there's enough detail there, you can go ahead and click on it and it'll actually give you a full breakdown of the syntax of how that property was defined. It will tell you version information as to what versions of the .NET framework support that property and what platforms that those versions of the framework will run on successfully. If you keep cruising, you also have all the methods, again with a description. You can show and hide inherited and protected methods. So if you don't want to see the ones that were inherited, you just want to see the ones that originated with this, that were created for this class. You don't care about the protected ones because you're not inheriting this class. Here's what you have. So we have go back, go forward, go home, go search. navigate with a string, navigate with a URI parameter being passed, navigate with a string and a bool, navigate with a string and a string, navigate with a URI and a bool, navigate with a URI and a string, navigate with a string and a string and a byte array and a string. Da 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 da. Print, refresh, refresh with options. So you have a lot going on. I'm interested in navigate with a string. So I click it. Again, I get the signature for it. I then can also get details about each parameter, what the parameters are for, what they mean, how they should be used, what exceptions can be thrown by this. And the part that I enjoy reading the most, because it's the only piece that actually gives me good detail about what this is the remarks. So the web browser control maintains a history list of all the pages. Basically what it goes through and tells you is that this control renders web pages and keeps track of history, back, forward, and so forth. So if you want it to load a page, you simply say navigate to this address. The browser will do all of the work and load up the page for you. So we need to use the navigate method. Back to the project. I'll say webbrowser1.navigate. I will pass in the address string. From here I can say webbrowser1.status text, and I can say lbl status.text equals webbrowser1.status text. F5. Type in google.com. Hit go. And there you go.
There's no status text?
There is no status text, correct. Do you know why there's no status text? The reason is that between the call to navigate and the time it hits that line, there is no status to be observed. So there literally is no status text at that point. That browser engine is trying to spin up and do all these requests and all this work that it needs to do, that there is no actual status up to that point. You know, we can type other things in here like reddit.com, go, and it'll load the page. Something slightly more complex. No, I'm not logged in, but pull up Facebook, you can sign in, you can do everything just the same. Yeah?
Can it be modified without having like the HTTP and the www where you got that fixed in and just be able to type like in Google, you can just type like the name of the company or something, and it just pulls up the website? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So you can just type facebook.com.
Or, yeah, like Facebook and just pull up the same way.
Right. Well, usually with Chrome, if you just type Facebook, it does a search.
And then we can do the same thing with that function.
Right. So yeah, so literally at this point the sky's the limit. So part of what I've actually given this as a homework assignment in the past to say here's the beginnings, go run with it. I've had students take this project, they've implemented favorites, they've downloaded browser icons, they've done like the whole 9 yards with the project, which has been very impressive. They implemented the search, they've implemented the control enter, so you can put the www and the .com on it. They've done the history, like kind of the Omnibox concept. So there's a lot of flexibility that you can do here. I mean, this is basically ground zero. You can build a browser to do whatever you want. The catch is that the rendering engine underneath is Internet Explorer. So you can put as many bells and whistles on this as you want, but at the end of the day, good or bad about it, you're actually just using Internet Explorer. So something to keep in mind.
It's a connection to Explorer. Explorer, right?
What was that?
It's a kind of a connection to Explorer.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so you're running whatever version of Explorer you have on the computer. Yeah.
You go to whatbrowser.org, see what it tells you.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Google page. Tell you what browser.
So there you go.
That's what you said.
Yep. So, and what's funny is that, so this is Windows 8, so it's running IE 10 technically, but it's only interpreting this control as IE 7. So it's very possible, I'd have to dig for more details, but it's very likely that it's only using IE 7 render engine. Or it's recording itself in IE 7 because it doesn't have all the functionality. So, so there you go. All right, so proof of concept successful. So to implement our back, forward, stop, and home buttons, it's very simplistic. Back to the designer, double-click stop, creates an event handler for us, this method that's wired up to that click event. So we can just do web browser 1.go back, forward. I'm just going to do all of them so I don't have to keep jumping back and forth. Alright, so here's my nav forward. Web browser 1, go forward. Web browser 1, go home. Or I'm sorry, stop. Web browser 1, go home. And then I'm going to actually implement an event on my text box. So the text box has an event called enter. If you read the description of the event, it occurs when the control becomes an active control. So that has to do with entering the control. What we want to do is we want to handle when the enter key is pressed. That is a key press event. So it was real simple and easy for us to double click a control and it would wire up events. This event is not a default event. So to wire it up, you double click the event. And it'll do the wire up just the same. Now, in the last set of events, we have these event args E. It's one of the parameters that's passed to us from the control. If you do E dot, you just get the basic stuff. Nothing fancy, nothing worthwhile. If you ever have an event that gives you something besides event args, a specific kind of event args, you might want to pay extra special attention because those event args are probably relevant. These event args in this case tell you whether or not the key press was handled and what key was pressed. So key char, which is of type char, we can put inside here and say if key char equals the char equivalent of the number 13, nav go underscore click. And I'm going to say this null. Character 13 is the enter key. So it actually has an ASCII key associated with it. So if that key char is 13, go ahead and run the same method or the same event, the same method that kicks off when you click the go button. You get that annoying ding sound. I haven't been able to figure out how to get rid of that yet. That's probably why an Internet Explorer always goes click. So we can go back, we can go forward, we can go home. If we try to go forward again, it just doesn't do anything because there's nowhere else to go. We can go back with a stop, back again. Now you notice that the address in the address bar never changes when we go back and forward. So in order to keep those things in sync, we need to wire up to some additional events to make sure that we know what the web browser control is doing. Because we're sending these goes and go back, go forward, stop, all these things, but we don't really know anything about the history of where it's navigating to, or where it has navigated to. So we can do it a few different ways. We can, after each one of these go backs, go forwards, we can say txt address box1.text equals web browser 1 dot location. Yes. No. No, I have to remember. What was it? It's just URL. So URL dot toString. So we could do that. We'd have to touch each one. But if in our history we have too many steps, so there's forward, back, what happens is that when you go to Microsoft.com, Microsoft actually, you don't see it now, you hit Microsoft.com, it does a redirect that happens just instantaneously. It actually takes you to that address, looks at your localization, figures out you're in the United States, forwards you to the appropriate page. If you're in Canada, take you to the Canadian page, England, and so forth. So we actually have two steps that happen inside of our browser. So just doing back doesn't really get us what we want. So the best method is to not do it here, but to go back to the web control itself and look at the events that we can wire into. So we have all kinds of options. We have control added, control removed, doc changed, document completed. So this happens once the page is fully loaded. File downloaded, so if we're actually doing file downloads, we can hook into that. Navigated and navigating. So navigated means that the navigation is completed. Navigating means that it's in process. So while the browser is navigating, oh, my video's it's hour 1. So while it's navigating, we can get things like status text, progress. There's actually an event specific to progress, so we can get on progress change. So if we want to update that progress bar with progress status. And then the rest of it are just basic control events. New window. So when a new window call is made from a link, we actually can handle that and then pop up a new window. So I'm going to go ahead and wire into navigated. Tuck that out of the way again. So again, we have another set of event args E. That passes to us the URI, which is basically the URL for the page that it navigated to. So we can then say, not that, txt address box dot text equals this dot toString. Okay. So if we go google.com, ding, Microsoft.com, if we go back and forward, we now get the correct URL. So that jump is no longer treated as part of the event history. Instead, we get what the final navigation point is when we go back and forth. Same we can do with the browser control. We can progress changed. So E dot maximum progress, current progress. So we have PB progress, and the progress bar itself has a lot of different properties, but there is a maximum, which we'll set that to E dot maximum progress, and then we'll do PB progress dot count value E dot current progress. And I think these take ints and these are longs. So we can do an int conversion. And we'll just shoot at the wind. Now, PB progress value equals 0. So what this does is reset the progress bar when navigating is complete. So after we've navigated, we want to reset that progress bar. In here, we can also do lbl status.text equals webbrowser1.statusText. And we can also copy this and put it here. So if we run, google.com, okay, so it wants us to set the PB progress minimum equal to -1. Okay. So we'll say if E current progress is greater than 0, do this, else PB progress dot value equals 0. So there's an if statement. Again, shouldn't be anything new. Pretty simplistic, similar to what you've seen before. So I've got both kind of notation setups, single line if statement. So here's the if conditional. Here's what executes after this line. Else, then I put that in curly brackets. I can put curly brackets after the if and before the else, just the same. You've got both ways of doing it. So what's happening, I know I was jumping in and out pretty fast, but that exception was basically saying that PB progress value must be greater than 0. And what's happening is that the current progress coming from the event is -1. So I'm looking at it and saying if the value is greater than 0, set it. If it's less than 0, treat it as 0. So we don't get an exception between the two. So we go google.com. Of course, the internet here is very fast. Reddit.com. Sure. So there's our progress at the bottom there.
that command that you program, right? It's
Right. So
program in.
yes. So the progress bar is the control that we added to the toolbar. So the actual drawing of the bar itself is that control. What we're doing is every time that progress change event occurs, it's passing to us the current progress value. I was afraid didn't like that HTTPS. So we're taking that value off as the event happens, and we're updating the progress bar status to that value, which is allowing the progress bar then to grow. So as that progress is updated, that value is then being fed to us so that we can reflect it in the progress bar. So we're not calculating anything. We're just taking that value that it gives us, and we're just saying, okay, progress bar, your value is X, whatever comes from the event arguments. And then the bar says, okay, and it just draws out that percentage based on what the max is and what the current progress is. So, does that answer the question?
Okay. So again, we can go back. No, we don't want to go back. Let's go back again. Go forward. There you go. So, in a nutshell, that's your a way for basically building any sort of Windows Form application. Again, that was very high level, but going through add your controls, wire up your events. That's the trick here, is that you're building what's considered a smart UI. You're taking your form, you're putting controls that the user is going to interact with, and then your goal as the developer, from a high level, is handle these events. When the user does this, when the user does that, what do I need to do as the developer to make the program respond the way that the user expects? So when they type in an address and they hit the enter key, it should grab that address, call the navigate function, or call the go method for when I click on the go button to actually navigate to the page. They click the back button, the forward button, have it do those things that it needs to do. So the responsibility is to wire up that little bit. Show the progress bar, wire into the progress change event, then update the progress bar with that change as it occurs. I'm going to put a breakpoint here because I want you to kind of see the mechanics. I think you probably get the basic gist, but I want to walk through this in detail real fast. So let me put a breakpoint here, just clicking in the margin, hit the start button. Since I know that works so well, let's do it again. So when this event occurs, the web browser control actually calls this method for us. It passes in these arguments. The first argument is the sender. The sender traditionally is the control that calls the event. So the web browser is the one that called it, so therefore the sender is the actual web browser control itself. It sends itself as a reference. Then the event argument, E, is just that kind of arbitrary package of information that's relevant to the event. So it passes in that the current progress is 100, maximum progress is 10,000. So those are the values that we get. The first step in the code is then to not even deal with that, but I just look at web browser 1, status text, which is none, and I set my label equal to that text. I can then step through this, and then I can take maximum progress 10,000. Maximum progress by default on a progress bar is 100, so it looks at it as a percentage, 0 to 100. And I then set that value. So my maximum progress is now 10,000. My current progress is 100, which is greater than 0. Steps into the if statement, does the cast from long to int. Notice that this says 100, this still says 0, because I haven't actually set it yet. The line has not executed. I then step over. I end up down here, because there's no else. PB progress value is now set to 100, so that value is passed. If I go ahead and hit play to continue, it's going to just loop back. And the reason it's looping back is that in that time it took me to debug, the event's happening. So I'm now back in the event again. Still no status from the browser. Maximum progress is still 10,000. Current progress is 150. Current progress is 150, so we step in. Huh? The 150 is the current progress. So the event happened again, so a new value came in.
Where do you read that?
Where did I read it?
What?
I moused
It is, yeah, okay.
moused over current progress here,
Okay, now I see.
and it popped it out. So continue again, and basically this just keeps happening continuously, and it's happening very quickly. So now current progress is 200, so every time that number climbs, 250, we can pin this. $300, $350, $400, boom, boom, boom. At some point, this status text may change. Maybe. Nope, maybe not. Oh. So, and it's just going to spin. So that progress is getting sent fractions of a second. I mean, it's happening constantly without those breakpoints in there. That's why the bar grows progressively by 50 steps, 50 points. And then eventually it'll error out, blow up, and not work. So this idea of handling these events is really the key to giving yourself a responsive UI. Now, you may have considered, well, I could just come back up here inside of the Go and done something like while web browser 1 is busy, PB progress.value equals, or we could do plus equals 1. Right? So that'll just add 1 to the progress bar itself. So we know that it starts off around 10,000, so we'll say PB progress maximum equals 10,000. And PB progress value is less than PB progress maximum. So while we haven't reached the maximum and we're in range, just add 1. So we'll do that. Right? Should be a good alternative. No big deal. F5. Let me take my event code out of here first. Progress bar isn't doing it. Nothing's happening. Just remember before when you said, well, how come the status didn't show anything? Let's put a breakpoint here. Stop. At that moment that we call navigate, the browser is not busy. The browser hasn't done anything yet. So this while loop is false. And because it's false, it'll never fall into the body of the loop, it'll never loop. Jumps right out. So is busy is probably a bad about property. There's got to be another option. But that's the only option we have. The other downside to using these loops inside of these event handlers you guys know about loops and break statements? If you're in a loop and you need to break out of that loop, if it maybe becomes infinite, you use the word break as the key word, and it kicks you right out. So the moment it hits that term break, it'll just pop you out of the loop. So even though this is technically an infinite loop, what will happen is it'll enter the loop, it'll hit this sleep thread, it'll sleep for that amount of time, becoming locked there, and then the next step will be to break out of the loop. So let's assume that the isBusy worked. Hit play, google.com, hit enter. Inside of this loop, when you actually put a loop in here instead of an event handler, the UI becomes completely unresponsive. The thread that's executing that event handler is the same thread that draws and manages all interfacing with this window. So the ability to drag and drop and resize or minimize, all of those things completely go out the window the moment that thread gets locked by a loop. So you know when you have a program and it becomes solely unresponsive and it does that nice white thing, that's because there's something that's not happening asynchronously. It's not happening that's event driven. And it's actually locking the main thread that runs that window. And the program just becomes completely unresponsive. So either until that line continues, releasing the thread, the loop breaks, or the program self-maintains and says, okay, I've been in this for too long, and then kicks itself out, you end up with a locked application. And you got to pull up your task manager and do an end task and all that jazz. So, as a Windows developer in particular, and you'll learn this more as we go through the class and as you go through other classes, this idea of asynchronous, event-driven programming is ideal because it allows the program, the main flow of the application, to remain responsive, to remain accessible to requests. If you try to do a lot of this, what's called thread blocking, but with loops and things like that, you end up making your program just stop. It takes it from being a parallel application to a serial one instantly. So if you think of it, you've got these computers now that have 2, 4, 8 processors in them. They're hyper-threaded, so you got double that. You got all this processing power in these machines. Well, the moment that application gets deadlocked, all of those extra processors that you could throw at it become completely irrelevant because that program is running on a single processor on a single thread, and it is not going to go anywhere. It's not going to respond to anything until it gets out of the deadlock. So the program couldn't even resize the window. It couldn't move the window. It couldn't do anything. It couldn't even listen to the mouse click to know that I was clicking on the form because it was locked inside of that loop. But when we attach to events, the events are asynchronous. The events happen on demand. The events, for understanding the physical nature of how that works, is actually executed in a different thread. It's kind of passed off to a second thread and says, hey, go handle this event or go run this events method. So it allows that code to execute without interrupting your ability to interact with the form itself. So the events are a very powerful thing, and doing work inside those events is a very powerful thing. It's a mechanism that's there to keep a responsive application. Okay? So doing things like loops, especially ones that could potentially be infinite, you need to be very hesitant of that. And when and if possible, don't start polling properties. Start to try to find events that you can wire into and let that application continue to run and flow without you locking it. Okay? All right, so That's, for the most part, chapters 5 and a little bit of 6, talking specifically around the event handling aspects. Did a little bit of WinForms development, built ourselves a web browser. Any questions on what I covered in the last hour of the lecture?